It started as a quiet morning in the countryside, a place where roosters crowed with the sunrise, where life moved at the steady pace of nature, and where neighbors were supposed to know and trust one another. But on that particular morning, peace was shattered. Jaime Perez stepped out of his modest farmhouse and heard the kind of noise no chicken owner ever wants to hear: screams, chaos, and the sound of feathers tearing through the air. What he saw would stay with him for years. Nearly all of his beloved chickens, the ones he'd raised with care and purpose, lying lifeless in the dirt. Jaime Perez wasn't just raising chickens for fun. For 10 months, he had poured his savings, time, and heart into this little farm project. He had bought 78 young hens from a well-known company called Stromberg's, spending $216 on the batch, hoping to grow them into a small business selling organic eggs. He loved the idea of natural living, of gathering his own eggs each morning, and maybe even turning it into a source of income someday. Everything was going as planned, until that morning in May when he discovered the massacre that wiped out nearly everything he'd built. Out of 78 chickens, only 3 survived. The rest were torn apart, their feathers scattered like snow across the ground. The sight made his stomach turn. But soon, Jaime learned who was responsible, or rather, what was responsible. His neighbor's dogs, 2 large Huskies that belonged to Prentice and Portia Burleson, the couple who lived down the road. Their dogs had somehow gotten loose, wandered onto his property, and turned his chicken coop into a killing ground. Jaime was devastated. But he wasn't the only one who saw what happened. His friend and neighbor, Felipe Garcia, had witnessed the entire attack with his own eyes. Felipe came home that morning to find feathers flying everywhere. He saw one of the Huskies outside the coop, shaking a chicken in its mouth until it went limp, while another dog was inside the coop, chasing and killing the remaining birds. It was a horrible, frenzied scene. Felipe immediately called Jaime and described what he saw in real time. Then, when Jaime arrived, they managed to trap one of the dogs inside his property to keep as evidence. Jaime even made a sign that said, "Found dog," and waited for its owner to come forward. When Prentice Burleson showed up later to retrieve his dog, he didn't come alone. He brought the police, claiming that Jaime was holding his dog illegally. He refused to accept that his Huskies had killed those chickens, even though one of them had been found inside the coop itself. To him, the story made no sense. His house was over a mile away, and he insisted his dogs could never have gone that far, killed dozens of chickens, and made it back to the other side of town. It was, in his words, ridiculous, but the facts were undeniable. A witness had seen his dogs in the coop. Jaime had physical proof, feathers, photos, and a traumatized yard, so Jaime Perez took his neighbors to court. He wasn't the kind of man who liked conflict, but losing 75 chickens wasn't something he could just let go. He filed a lawsuit for damages, asking for compensation for his loss. He believed that the Burlesons should be held responsible for what their dogs had done, and that's how they all ended up in front of the legendary Judge Judy. From the moment the hearing began, Judge Judy's sharp intuition and no-nonsense attitude filled the courtroom. She listened closely to Jaime's calm and honest testimony, asking detailed questions about his chickens, how long he'd had them, what he paid for them, what they were for. Jaime explained that they were an investment for organic egg production, both for personal use and small-scale retail. He'd nurtured them for 10 months, feeding and caring for them daily, watching them grow. When Judge Judy asked about the total loss, he said softly that only 3 chickens had survived. That number alone was enough to make the judge raise her eyebrows in disbelief. Next came the defendants. Prentice and Portia Burleson insisted their Huskies had never left their property. Prentice's voice grew defensive as Judge Judy pressed him on the details. But Judy wasn't buying it. She pointed out that one of the dogs was literally found on Jaime's property, inside the coop where the chickens were killed. Prentice tried to argue that Jaime had no proof, but she immediately cut him off, reminding him that a sign had been posted by Jaime himself, saying, "I have your dog." Prentice's claim that his dogs couldn't have traveled that distance didn't impress her either. "Listen to me," she snapped. "He doesn't care about your dogs running loose in the street. He only cared because your dogs were on his property killing his chickens." Then came Felipe Garcia's testimony. In clear, simple words, Felipe described exactly what he had seen that morning. The 2 Huskies, one inside the coop, one outside, both attacking the chickens. He saw feathers flying, heard the desperate clucking, and even witnessed one dog run off with a chicken in its mouth. It was a vivid, horrifying picture. Judge Judy listened carefully, watching Felipe's body language, and after a few questions, she made up her mind. "There is no way this man is lying to me," she said firmly. But Prentice wouldn't give up. He tried to challenge Felipe's credibility, saying that he ran a scrap metal business and often drove around the neighborhood. To Judge Judy, this argument was meaningless. She cut him off sharply. "Who cares?" she said. "That has nothing to do with what he saw." When Prentice continued arguing, she grew visibly irritated. "Mr. Burleson," she said sternly, "I don't know what's wrong with you. Maybe you got up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. Or maybe your underwear is too tight. But don't take it out on me." The courtroom burst into laughter, and even Prentice couldn't help but crack a nervous smile. Still, the tension was thick. Judge Judy turned back to Jaime. She acknowledged his loss and agreed that his chickens were more than just livestock. They were an investment. But she also made it clear that his requested damages were too high. Jaime had asked for nearly $5,000, claiming future profits and emotional distress. Judge Judy explained that while his pain was understandable, the law had to be fair and realistic. He had paid 206 toned for the chickens and raised them for 10 months, so it was reasonable to grant him additional compensation for his time, effort, and the potential value they had gained. "Even if I gave you 10 times what you paid," she said, "that's $2,000. When Prentice tried to interrupt again, claiming Jaime had detained his dog illegally, Judy was done. She slammed down the final verdict with her trademark authority. "You're an idiot," she said bluntly. $2,000 judgment for the plaintiff, and that was that. The case was over. Jaime Perez didn't walk away rich, but he walked away with justice. His neighbors had been held accountable, and the truth had been laid bare. For weeks afterward, people in the small rural community talked about the case. Some felt sorry for the Burlesons, whose dogs had gotten into trouble. But most sympathized with Jaime. They knew what it meant to lose something you'd built with your own hands. In a quiet town where fences marked more than just property lines, this case became a cautionary tale, a reminder that being a good neighbor means keeping your gates locked and your word honest. As for Jaime, he started again. With the compensation he received, he bought new chicks, repaired his chicken coop, and reinforced the fences. Every morning, when the sun rose over the fields, he walked out to the coop and checked on his new flock. The trauma of that May morning still haunted him, but it also taught him resilience. And while he never spoke much about courtrooms or judges, whenever someone brought up the name Judge Judy, a small smile would appear on his face. Because for one day, in that small TV courtroom, justice had truly been served.